While the war continues to rage in Ukraine, it appears that there may be a breakthrough in the making at the front. For more on that, we spoke with Mark Sleboda, International Relations Specialist and Lecturer at Moscow State University, via Skype from Moscow on Monday. Mark Sleboda, welcome back. Why don't you give us an update first on the battlefield and then some of the things happening in the halls of power, as they put it.
So right now, I think it is fair to say that in East Ukraine, centered around the small city of Bakhmut, or as the Russians and the locals still call it, Artyomovsk, is probably the most intense and largest battle of the conflict so far. And it is probably the first major battle, definitely since Mariupol, but on an even larger scale than that, where neither side is backing down. Both sides are throwing reinforcements into the fight, particularly the Kiev regime side. They are throwing reinforcements after reinforcements after reinforcements. Their crack troops, their territorial defense, their fresh conscripts with guns shoved in their hands. And I recommend looking at the pictures of it just so you can understand what modern war, a land war, looks like. It looks a lot like World War I in a lot of ways. Trench and fortification warfare, artillery heavy, and it is a brutal, brutal conflict right now with tens of thousands of troops on either side in a death struggle. This city is important, first of all, because it holds the Kiev regime's second to last defensive lines. It is the linchpin of that. If Bakhmut falls, then the whole defensive line will collapse. And likewise, it is an important transport and logistics hubs, both for road and rail traffic.
Just what is the implication for the overall war? Just as a side note, but I'm curious. If that line collapses, what does that mean exactly in terms of the layout on the battlefield is this?
Yeah, well, if Russia fails to take it, then the whole purpose of liberating Donbass and the future of any further offensives are called into question. Right. If the Kiev regime loses it will essentially almost certainly foretell that all of Donbass will be liberated. The Kiev regime forces will have to fall back to the last defensive line, and if they can't hold at Bakhmut, it is extremely unlikely that in the long term they will be able to hold at Slavyansk or Slavyansk-Kramatorsk line, because they've thrown so much into this. All the Western weapons they had, all the ammunition, tens of thousands of troops. The New York Times calls it a death vortex. Former U.S. General Wesley Clark called it a fire bag for the Ukrainians. Others in the media regularly refers to it as a meat grinder. The Kiev regime forces casualties are truly brutal and horrific, because the Russian warfare style is artillery heavy. They don't even move in with assault troops until they have softened the fortifications, the trenches, the battlefields, which means a lot of these poor Ukrainian conscripts forced into service never even see the enemy before they die.
Right, mud and blood, yeah.
Right now, the Russian forces, after fighting for the city of months, have made some breakthroughs around settlements to the south and to the north. Effectively, they claim putting the city under fire control, which means the last two supply lines going into the city are vulnerable to Russian artillery strikes on a routine basis. And the Kiev regime has begun blowing up bridges, rail bridges connecting this city with the last defensive line further west, and that's a sure sign that the writing is on the wall. And likewise, there is a similar situation further to the south, still really on the outskirts of Donetsk city, and the nearest cities to that, Mariinka, another important Kiev regime citadel city. has, according to Russian forces, fallen, and they are in clearing operations in the city right now. So all across the front line, wherever the Kiev regime forces were on offensive during the autumn, it is either now frozen or the Russian forces are on local offensive themselves. And where Russia has been pressing the offensive in the central Donetsk region and South Donetsk for months now, Russian forces are starting to tell and starting to have success after success. After admittedly very slow progress, but minimizing the casualties on their side and maximizing the casualties on the far side. And this is before even the bulk of the 380-some thousand Russian reservists and volunteers that have been called up have been put into the fray, which will almost certainly be a major, probably late winter offensive.
Right. Okay, so we keep hearing about Ukrainian offensives and victories and massive Russian losses and all of these things, and yet the Ukraine keeps shrinking as this all goes on, and we keep hearing about actual battles turning out the way you're describing. So let's follow this up next week and swing to what's going on between Russia and Iran that has everybody in Washington all upset.
Yeah, so the Washington Post, the New York Times are echoing the words of the U.S. Spokesman John Kirby in saying that, screaming, warning about the growing unprecedented level of military technical cooperation, the strategic partnership between Russia and Iran. Because the U.S. is very clear to say that, everyone is free to form their own defensive, their own alliances when those political forces ally with the U.S. But when they're allying with forces opposed to the U.S., then they must be disrupted and they're a threat to the global order and so on.
I mean, even more specifically, in the case of these, just like we saw, the first time I saw that strategic partnership word pop up around Russia was back in 2014 when President Xi and President Putin mentioned it. It's when two countries are being attacked by the United States, and if they find common cause in that, that's a problem for Washington.
Yes, exactly. And it has to be said that Russia, China, and Iran are all in a tripartite strategic partnerships now, very strong ones with each other. And these are countries that have vastly different political systems, cultures, histories, and sometimes, conflictual histories among each other.
Right.
But they have formed such common cause because they are all in what I think in the future will be regarded as a geopolitically moronic move, all being pressed simultaneously rather than the more realist foreign policy that the U.S. adopted during the Cold War of playing divide and conquer with the Sino-Soviet split. And this is these three countries are forming the center of a multipolar world moving forward outside of U.S. hegemony.
Actually being flaked and formed under U.S. pressure as if they were squeezing them together. Mark, thank you so much. We'll speak with you again next week.
Thanks for having me, Don.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.